Okay, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Have attention, please. I'll go out, please. Thank you. All right, so we're about to embark on the last of the lessons for government. We got 3 lessons, and it all comes back around to politics, right? Politics is been kind of underlying all of the different things that we've looked at throughout the entire year, but now we're going to get into like the nitty-gritty details of politics and the verbiage and lots of details. And so yeah, get your typing ready, get your pencil, pens, or whatever you're taking notes on, because like with the material in the Civil Rights Unit, there will be an essay assessment on this as well that you're going to be doing in a couple of weeks time. So let's get right to it, shall we? All right. Oh, and by the way, so that I don't get copyrighted or anything like that, copyright blocked, I've got a bunch of links. You'll see them already in Google Classroom. At times I'll pause and you can take a look at the link. There's some pretty good stuff out there, all right? But otherwise, for this particular video, I think I'm just gonna keep it straight on with the whatever I got in my PowerPoint. Okay, so let's get to it. Okay, so yeah, for instance, today we've got what, three pages in the handout. Print that out or have that available to you. Politics. We're going to be covering page 1, public opinion. We'll get into campaigning, and also on to page 2, we'll get into we'll continue on with campaigning, wholesale politics versus big time politics. The next time we'll get into interest groups and voting in elections and so forth, and wrap it up with political parties and that presidential election of 2020. Yeah, we got plenty of examples going on here. So let's get right to it. Politics. Oh my gosh. You love having political discussions with people? There's some people you don't want to have political discussions with. It's very important. I mean, hey, you can go back to what we did early first semester. You know, hey, let's just go with dictatorship, authoritarian government. Just give power to one person to be totally in charge. No. Politics is messy and it's not always pleasant and so forth, but you know what? You got to get involved in this stuff. I'm going to just be preaching that stuff over and over and over again. So, all right. We're talking about politics in a democracy here, right? So we got to start with public opinion, okay? You see the public opinion? We care about what people think in our country, in countries that have democracy, okay? Because that's where a lot of the rules are. Now, I mean, there's going to be limitations. Obviously, we just finished civil rights. You know, you can't just go, oh, my public opinion is that we should, like, you know, segregate that group of people over there because, you know, we don't. No, there's rights, and then there's people's opinions, and they matter. Okay, so let's look at that, people's opinions. And as we go through, we're going to be looking at measurements of people's opinions and how to describe them. And of course, one of the key terms we get to right away is political socialization. There it is. We got a slide for you. Political socialization. Process of shaping one's ideas and attitudes about government. Wow, look what I found. Factors that affect public views: family, school, peers, media. These are the kinds of things that have an impact on people. And in fact, parents, you can put that down. Parents tend to be the #1 source of influence on people when they're younger. And it tends to wane a bit, not entirely, but I mean, think to yourself. I mean, do your parents have a lot of influence over the kind of the way you were thinking when you're 5, 10? Do they still? You start moving away as you have different experiences. You use your brain. You use your maturation process and so forth. But probably, so social scientists have still found that parents and family members are very, very influential and help determine kind of where people are coming from when it comes to their views in politics and in the world and how things work. Okay, so interesting thing as far as like the age and political opinions. You see that? Curiously enough, sometimes people are like, oh, it's 18. You know, that's the time when people vote. That's the real important year. Now, actually, it's about 12 or 13. When people's opinions start really factoring in. It's part of that maturation puberty process where you're looking around and it's like, oh my gosh, and you start really forming ideas and so forth. Those are very, very influential. It's 12, 13, 14. Not that it's going to stop at that point, but that's when a lot of the important ideas start to really kick in. Okay. All right. Let's get to this term that you see, political ideology. What is your ideology in left and right and what the heck spectrum and so forth? What is your ideology as opposed to your partisan identity? You'll find that as I go through this, I'll kind of flip-flop between saying, you know, leftist ideology or liberal ideology, and sometimes refer to the Democratic Party because there's some close connections there. Similarly, the partisan identity, political party of Republican is also closely associated with political ideology. So what is political ideology? It's pretty simple. It's the collection of your individual political groups, or opinions, excuse me, the collection of your political opinions. And, you know, you can take some time and do surveys, you know, look at all kinds of various different things. I view this way on, you know, like gun control, I view this way on abortion, I view this way on taxes, I view this way on, you know, same-sex marriage, all kinds of various different things, all kinds of different issues, and everyone comes up a little bit different. To the extent that you tend to clump around certain points of view, that's where your political ideological terms come in, right? So you see right here in the center, this particular slide I pulled off the internet, and they don't have the one right in the middle, which would be like moderate ideology. So you have over to the right, and they've chosen the Republican emblem here, the elephant, conservatism, okay? Over here a little bit to the left, liberalism. You're like, what the heck, left, right? It happened in France a long time ago. A bunch of the people in the room that for some legislature thing and so forth, the people in the room that tended to be what we now think of as on the left sat on the left. The other one sat on the right, and so it kind of stuck, right? And it's kind of like, why is the Democratic Party the blue party and the Republican Party the red? It wasn't that way when I was growing up, but it just started coming into existence, I don't know, maybe about 20 years ago, and now it's kind of stuck. It's actually kind of weird, because during most of the 20th century, red was the color associated with the left, far left, yeah, communism and socialism and so forth. And now red is, you know, like the Republican Party. Idaho is a red state. Anyway, whatever. That's what happens when the Cold War is over. So you got this spectrum. Now notice this. As you move a little bit further to the right, you get into, I don't know, Marxism and so forth. You get into some far right-wing things, Nazism, fascism, and so forth. If you move further away to the left, you started to get into some really interesting things, communism, you know, socialism sort of in between there, more and more extreme. So there's your political spectrum. I don't have it on here, but sometimes it actually makes sense to do a spectrum as a circle, right? Because when you have a circle, at the very top, you have liberalism, conservatism. They're not extremely that far apart, although the differences seem very big in America. But these actually, communism and so forth, extreme communism and extreme Nazism, fascism, they actually have quite a bit in common as far as repression of individual rights and civil rights. Liberals and conservatives, for the most part, are like, hey, let's just talk about this. Free to talk, free press, you know, free rights and so forth. They're going to be generally supportive of those things, right? So you don't have liberal governments, conservative governments that are also extreme authoritarian. Anyway, so there's the political spectrum. We'll get into more in party identity and so forth as we go along. So let's get differences as we go through. You can notice here in your head, we'll be talking about fiscal liberals, social conservatives, fiscal conservatives. So let's get the definitions of what the heck is fiscal issues versus social issues. Because some of you might be fiscally conservative, but socially liberal. Or you could be socially conservative, but fiscally liberal. So it's kind of a clump of issues. Fiscal issues, write this down, tend to be issues associated with taxing, spending. Think of money type issues. How should the government run as far as like taxes and spending? Okay. Social issues are going to be a whole clump of different issues, and you can see I pulled this thing up there. You've got issues having to do with immigration and abortion, same-sex marriage, all kinds of different social types of things. So, right, and you could have somebody going, yeah, I'm in favor of same-sex marriage, social liberal, but I really like low taxes, fiscal conservative. Okay, so anyway, just as a quick primer on some of the differences as far as some of the social issues. Let's get into liberal. All right, so let's get, what is some of the things associated with liberal? Generally, liberal tends to be, not entirely, but generally more in favor of, more supportive of government involvement in providing support for various different groups that are, maybe disadvantaged, employed, right? Liberals were pushing for unemployment benefits. The idea there is progress. Sometimes you hear people say, oh, I'm not liberal, I'm progressive. It's kind of the same. Looking more reliance on the government to kind of help solve things, as opposed to like leave it up to the private sector, leave it up to individuals to get these things solved, right? So, sometimes you'll hear critics call them big government liberals, right? Maybe bigger government, although we'll see some examples where conservatives actually are in favor of more government on particular things, okay? So we'll keep an eye on that one. For liberals, tradition isn't as critical. Let's look at trying to do some things differently. Whereas, conservative, jump ahead, conservatives, they tend to say a little bit more like, let's, keep government smaller. Let's follow more tradition. Let's do things kind of the way we have done, more individual personal responsibility instead of relying on the government to get things solved and so forth. Tend to like lower taxes. And so you get kind of gradients in there. Who's in favor of public education? Liberals or conservative? Right, they both are, right? Who's in favor of, government providing benefits for people? Here's a one for you. Who's in favor of government providing benefits for people who are out of jobs as a result of the coronavirus? Liberals and conservatives. Now, as you move further along, like someone who's very, very conservative might be like, oh, I don't know if I really feel that great about the government going out and providing all that money and so forth. And yet, in the short term, for a crisis and so forth, you may get some conservatives who are saying, yeah, no, this is good. Tough on crime, tougher penalties. On the criminal issues, liberals tend to be a little bit more sort of like, let's see if we can solve it by education and prevention, social programs, more money for social programs and so forth. Conservatives a little bit more tend to favor, let's get tough on these things. Do not let the criminals out. So, curiously enough, who wants more spending by the government in order to have to deal with crime? Could be the conservatives. Let's have more jail space, because you can't trust necessarily people who commit these terrible crimes to do the right thing. So we need to handle it that way. Military strength. This is an interesting one. Conservatives tend to look to the military to be able to solve things. Liberals are a little bit more hope and reliance and dependence on diplomacy to get things solved as far as difficulties with other countries and so forth. So curiously enough, conservatives tend to want more money for stronger military. Not that liberals don't. It's a gradient through there, okay? Here's another example of where liberal and conservative come a little bit different as far as like size of government. A liberal on the issue of abortion. Liberals tend to be more in favor of abortion rights. So they want the government to stay out of the individual females who are pregnant. Let the females and the doctors make decisions and yada, yada, yada. Whereas conservatives would say, in order to protect the unborn life, we want the government to step in and intervene and provide that protection. So again, there's no simple solution of big government, liberal, small government, conservative. On some issues, the conservative position does involve a little bit more government interaction, abortion prevention for conservatives, or pro-life position, or like military, or criminal law enforcement. Okay, those would be some examples of some things. So you get a little bit of a gist between conservative and liberal, a little bit. Okay, you hear those words thrown around a lot. So Idaho tends to be what, more of a liberal state, a conservative state? Conservative state. Okay, and the conservative political party tends to be nowadays the Republican Party, although it varies. You can find some parts of the country that you have Republicans who tend to be a little bit more liberal than the Republicans in, say, Idaho or Wyoming or Utah. Same thing with Democrats. When we saw this in the Civil Rights Unit, there were some pretty conservative Democrats in the deep, deep South during the 1950s and 60s. Some of them have moved away, and as they're still conservative, they've found a home in the Republican Party. So the Deep South has become quite conservative. Okay, moderates. So the moderates end up being kind of middle of the road. I mean, they got conservative issues, liberal issues. Sometimes it's like, well, you know, like public education. How much money should there be in public education? Moderates like, well, you know, I'm going to put too much money, but we don't want to put too less. So it's tough, and there are moderates. Of course, if you're within the Republican or Democratic Party, sometimes the folks within those parties are like, oh, you're too far over on the other side. Why don't you go join the other side? Okay, well, when we get to political parties, we're going to see. You don't want to tell too many people to leave your party, because otherwise you're not going to get enough votes and support in order to win elections. More on that later when we get to political parties. Okay. All right, let's talk about some extreme totalitarian ideologies. We don't tend to have these very much in this country, thank goodness, because thankfully things haven't gotten so bad. In the 1930s, during the Great Depression, the economy was so bad, unemployment was like really bad for a long time. You did have some extreme ideologies saying, well, give us support and we'll fix things up. Just like, take your pick, the communists did in the Soviet Union. Everyone went back to work there. Or the Nazis, extremists on the right, took control and took power and moved the democracy aside in Germany in the 1930s. So those are extreme ideologies, reactionaries on the right, radicals on the left, okay? This country, most healthy democracies tend to have very, very small numbers in these areas. But boy, they get together in a public protest, watch out, you don't want to get in between them, because sometimes not only they have radical ideas, they want to fight. Oh my gosh, so not a very pleasant situation to be around. The extremists, okay? Let's talk about the Libertarian Ideology, which actually ties into, you'll see later on, there's a political party called the Libertarian Political Party. They're kind of an interesting one. Like the image says, not left, not right, just free. Think of liberty. That's the big, big thing. They like less government involvement in things. Less government. In fact, some libertarians would say, what are we doing raising taxes for public education and all these public programs and so forth? All we need is some taxes for our military and police, national domestic security, and everything else up to the people, right? So that sounds like very, very conservative, although if you look at social issues, libertarians tend to, not all, but libertarians tend to say, get the government out of, like for example, you know, legalization of marijuana. Not too, there's quite a few libertarians that are like, legalize everything, right? Just legalize it. Let the people decide whether or not they want to, So that's a general gist of libertarians. Now, when we get to political parties, we're going to see Libertarian political party is not a big, big political party. So oftentimes people who associate with libertarian politics tend to go into, which political party you think, Republican or Democrat? They tend to go into the Republican Party, although not entirely, okay? But anyway, we'll keep an eye on Libertarian Ideology. It's one of the smaller ones, but it is an important one in the United States of America, okay? All right, now we're moving along here. Oh my gosh. Demographic differences. Do you see that right there? And still in public opinion. When politicians and people who want to know, political scientists want to know kind of like how things shake out, how people's ideologies and their partisan favorabilities are, what are the demographic influences and so forth there? We'll just go through those, okay? So like, for example, gender, that's kind of a basic one. Men, women, do they tend to be, one group tend to be more conservative or more liberal than the others? What do the social scientists say? I mean, those are two big, big groups. Is there huge, huge issues? Some people, it's interesting, they're like, well, I think women are more pro-choice. Actually, not that much more pro-choice. There's a lot of pro-life women, so you'd be surprised on that one. As far as like use of military force, women tend to be less favorable toward that, perhaps more liberal on that particular thing, and men tend to say, yeah, the military can get the job done and so forth. Okay, so there's a little bit of a difference there. Women a little bit more reliant and have confidence in, diplomacy to get things done. Men maybe not as much. On the whole, those are some of the ideological differences. Interestingly enough, like on issues related to women, and it's interesting because certain politicians, I don't know, in the current like presidential race between Trump and Biden, you guys know who has a gender gap, favorability gap. Biden tends to have more support among women. Trump has more support among men, although it's not completely indicative of how things are going to turn out. Okay. All right, let's continue on looking at some of the other differences. Age. Age is fascinating. Age is an interesting one. Because with age, a lot of the things that happen in one's life influence the way people look at things. So for example, if you talk to people who grew up during the Depression, that really influences the way they look at how the government should be involved in things. If you're younger and you're not, paying taxes for things, sometimes folks will say, oh, well, you're probably going to be more fiscally liberal. The government should pay for education and so forth and so on. When you're actually finished with your education and you're earning money and you're paying taxes and so forth, sometimes some of the folks, as they get older, become a little bit more fiscally conservative. Okay. On social issues, I would say particularly like same-sex marriage, there was a gap. The younger voters tended to be more socially liberal, particularly on that issue. And older voters tended to be more socially conservative. And so it's no surprise that things have changed on that particular issue. Although another social issue, abortion, remained fairly constant. All right, you don't see these big gaps. It's not like, when Roe versus Wade came in, everyone looks and goes, oh, okay, fine, yeah, fine. I mean, Obergefell case, same-sex marriage, I mean, that one's kind of like at the past. I mean, not as many people are kind of going up like, that needs to be changed. Roe versus Wade, there's still a lot of people are going, that needs to be changed. And so it's still front and center. So the abortion issue, age there's not as much big differences as far as the age on that one. Same-sex marriage, you see bigger differences. Age, high favorability among young, lower favorability among the older. Okay. Income, what do you think? The wealthier you are, you think you're going to be more fiscally liberal or conservative? You have all that money, you want to pay more in taxes or less in taxes? You tend to want to pay less in taxes. If you're very poor, your income is very low, and you really do see the benefit of having government support and unemployment benefits and things like that, you tend to be a little bit more fiscally liberal because, you can see the benefit of actually having the government help out during tough times. Okay. Family status, think about that. What do you suppose? Which group do you suppose is going to be more conservative? Married with lots of kids or not married at all? I think some of you guys figured this one out. Married with lots of kids tends to be a little bit more conservative as far as the family status. Not married tends to come in a little bit more liberal, by and large, not 100%. Ethnicity is an interesting one. And again, a lot of this depends on kind of the history of how people have experienced things in this country. So for example, African Americans, to the extent that you're an African American that's in a low income group, then you may be more fiscally liberal, okay, because you see the benefits on that. On civil rights issues, yeah, you see, so you look back to the past or even the present, and you may be a little bit more liberal and want the government to help out on civil rights issues and so forth. Other different ethnic groups. Curiously enough, on the immigration issue, guess which group is like really honed in and focused on that issue? Yeah, Latino voters in this country. So they're very, very sensitive to how the debate is going on in this country as far as like immigration and undocumented workers, and is this just about undocumented workers, or is part of the concern about like cultural changes in the country becoming more Latino? Because if there's that sense, that you're going to see Latino voters maybe moving more in the direction of, the Democratic Party. Although, to the extent that Latino voters are very much involved, I mean, talked about this, we're just about to, on religion, to the extent that the Latino voters are very much like regular church-going Catholic voters and so forth, they tend to maybe be more socially conservative. So kind of pulls back and forth this either way. But you can imagine when candidate Trump was saying, let's stop immigration coming through, a lot of Latino voters are like, what exactly are you saying? Are you like anti-Latino? Are you anti illegal immigration? Or we're kind of, what exactly is going on there? Anyway, we'll talk about that more later on, as far as like building up coalitions and building up different groups to support your candidacy. Religion. Let's look at religion. By the way, largest ethnic group, whites, which is actually getting smaller and smaller as a percentage in this country, tends to be kind of all over the place. Tends to be a little bit more Republican, a little bit more African Americans tend to be very, very Democratic. Although not to say liberal on every issue. Religion. What do you think as far as religion? People who attend religious services, more conservative, less conservative, as opposed to, say, people who do not believe in religion and are actually about atheist. What do you think is going to be more conservative? Yeah, the ones who attending church and so forth. The ones who are atheists tend to be more liberal, okay? Within that, Catholic is fairly even. More conservative, fundamentalist, evangelical Christian, Church of Jesus Christ, Latter-day Saints that tend to be the more conservative. There's some denominational Protestant churches like the Episcopalian, Lutheran, and so forth that tend to be a little bit more liberal. Jews in this country have had an interesting experience. They tend to be a little bit more liberal on things as they have experienced discrimination and advocating for civil rights protection. U.S. policy toward Israel is a very big important thing toward Jewish voters in this country. Regions. So we got the regions there. Oh yeah, let's look at the regions. Let's get right into the regions. What are the blue states and what are the red states? Yeah, let's look at this map. This is a what year was this? This was when 2012. The states in blue, won by Barack Obama, running for re-election, and there's Mitt Romney, Republican. And the red states, go ahead and write this down. The red states tend to be more Rocky Mountain states, rural areas, small town. The Deep South tends to be quite conservative and also Republican as the Rocky Mountain states. The more liberal or blue areas, the Northeast, right? The Northeast cities also tend to be more liberal. Here along the California, Oregon, Washington, particularly the western parts along the coast, or the so-called left coast, tend to be more areas that tend to be more liberal and Democrat. This area right here, keep an eye on this one. This is the Midwest, Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Iowa. These are the battleground, a lot of the battleground states, very, very important swing states. And you got quite a bit of a mix of Republican, Democrat, liberal, conservative there. Let's take a look at this next map. This actually helps us a little bit here because you're like, whoa, that's a lot of red. But if you actually look at the county areas, and you got some very sparsely populated counties that are very conservative, very Republican, whereas if you were to look at, say, oh, there's not much blue right there. Well, there's like millions of people living in New York City, Los Angeles, San Francisco, Seattle, Portland, and so forth. And so these highly dense populated urban areas tend to be quite blue. And so for example, right here, Illinois, you're like, oh, there's a lot of red counties in Illinois, but there's a lot of voters in Chicago. And so that's why Illinois is pretty much a blue state and has been for quite some time. Okay, so yeah, probably a lot of the battleground areas are your suburbs, like the neighborhoods right outside of the big cities, not quite small town, suburbs. That's where a lot of the competition really is as far as getting voters. Okay. All right, how are we doing? Ah, yes. Oh, let's take a look at this, 2016. One of the things that Donald Trump was able to successfully do as he was running for president in 2016, he was able to flip. Take a look here. See, you see Ohio, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, Iowa, they all went for Florida, right? Big state, big swing state. They all went for Barack Obama in his reelection effort. Take a look here, 2016, there you go. Trump got Iowa, Wisconsin, Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Florida, and got the election, okay? So keep an eye on that one. Don't be surprised if in 2020, this year, there's a lot of visits by the respective candidate. Well, I won't say, I don't know if we can still do much visiting. Everyone's kind of stuck, but a lot of attention and television ads. And we'll look at this, all this political attention going to those swing states, because there's quite a bit of a mix. You're not going to see a big effort on the part of Biden or Trump to try and win Idaho. Idaho is going for Trump. And if Trump doesn't carry Idaho, he's probably lost every other state. Similarly, even California, it's a big, big state, but I don't see Trump pushing to get those 55 electoral votes, because it's so many voters in those urban areas that are true, Biden voters and so forth, Democrat voters. So a lot of the competition right there. All right. So we've got the ideology. All right. So now get to this. You want to know what people think. You can ask them. All right. So political scientists, politicians, newspapers, news media organizations, they want to know what people think to kind of get a sense of how things working. So they conduct polls. They ask questions. They conduct polls. Now, scientifically, you don't just go around and ask the first 5 people. To get the best scientific poll, you need to use a random sample, okay? All right, random sample. I picked this little slide here to see, ask the question, is this a good random poll sampling? Random poll sampling, it needs to be random. And in the sample, you need to have generally a reflection of the overall audience. So if you did a national poll for the United States of America, and you're not going to ask millions and millions of people questions, you can't afford to ask that many people questions. There's no way it's going to happen. So you ask like 3,000. That sample of 3,000 has to reflect the group of people who you are pulling that sample from. So take a look here. Do you see this sample? Do you see any problems with the sample? All right, you got 3 green and 1 blue as a sample of the entire community there. Well, you can see an obvious problem is, are they sampling purple? No. Have they oversampled green? I don't know. So when you do a random sample, you need to have like a sample of men, women, young, old, poor, rich, black, Asian, African, white, I mean, the whole range. Otherwise, your sample is not going to be very good, and your poll results aren't going to be very reliable. So somebody will come back with a poll result going, everybody wants this. And you're like, really? Am I getting good information there? Okay. I mean, straw poll is a different way of doing things. Do you approve or disapprove of the job that Donald Trump is doing as president? Oh my gosh, this was a Fox News straw poll. How does a straw poll work different from a random sample poll? A random sample poll, they get a random sample of everyone. How does a straw poll work? The number of people who just dial up. Does the news audience watching Fox News, does that tend to be more conservative or less? Some of you guys know this. More conservative, more favorable to Trump or less? Yeah. I mean, a lot of the people, excuse me, don't like Trump. They're probably not going to be watching. They're probably not going to participate in this. This gives you a measure kind of like how strongly people feel, but man, it's not as good overall in getting a sense of where the population is as a good random sample poll. Okay, does that make sense? Okay, now, sometimes pollsters, political scientists, political campaigns, they want more than just like 10 questions. They want to get in depth. They want to get into a sense of what the people are thinking. And so they use what's called a focus group, okay? This allows the surveyor, right here in this chair, I guess, to kind of go around. They do the initial questions like they would a random sample, and you need to have a nice random sample of the group overall. And then you follow up with questions. You get a little bit more detail. You get a little bit deeper sense of what's going on in the minds of these voters and Americans and so forth. So you have a better understanding. Bill Clinton, when he was involved in politics in the 1990s, he used a lot of focus groups and he got a lot of words from these American voters. Don't be surprised if those, excuse me, those very same words appeared in a lot of his campaign material and his speeches, as though he was speaking to the American people. He was saying what they were saying. How did he find out what they were saying? In part by having very good, effective focus groups. Now, some of you guys are like, well, that seems awfully manipulative and so forth. You know, people should have their opinions and then go with them. It's politics. You know, you guys figure out, what do you want in a politician? Do they all have like very firm ideas about how things should be? Or are they not as certain about some things and they're like, well, I'm willing to listen to the people? Or do they just sort of like lick their fingers, stick it in the wind and see which way the wind is blowing? And so they don't, you know, they're like, where am I on this issue? I mean, it's always tough. Like, for example, you know, leading politicians, you know, in one area, if it's very pro-choice and they're running for office and so forth, they may be pro-choice. And then they are running for office at a conservative area, then they may be pro-life, and people are looking, going, what are you switching? Where's your true feelings and so forth on that? Anyway, so that is your focus group, okay? Now, who makes the biggest impact as far as public opinion? These are going to be what are sometimes referred to as your squeaky wheel citizens, right? This is the last one there. I call them citizen opinion leaders, right? It's kind of like the expression is the squeaky wheel gets the grease. You got to squeak, 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 right? You put some grease on it. You pay attention to it. The politicians pay attention to the voters, the people in the community who are like, gah, gah, gah. They want to be heard. They want to be involved. And they're not just like, you know, annoying or anything. They're like, they're paying attention. These are the folks that are going to vote. These are the folks that are going to get involved in the campaigns. These are the folks that are going to speak out. Their voices are bigger. If you don't get involved, you don't squeak, you don't vote, the politicians are like, you don't seem to matter that much. Should I really pay attention to you? If you're informed, you care about it, you express yourself in an informative way, you could not only like carry your vote to the polling place, you could be influencing many other people and helping to decide the outcome of the election. Example I always bring up with students is like on, you know, spending issues. I don't know, what should we spend more money? Should we spend more money on, like, you know, supporting, you know, public education, college? Should we spend more money on like retirement programs for all those boomers? You know, they both cost money. And of course you're thinking, well, you know, I've got young people, they're voters, and old people are voters, and who actually turns out in the bigger numbers and votes? Who pays attention? Who are the politicians know is paying attention? The older ones. They tend to vote more regularly. They tend to pay more attention. Should it always be that way? No. Young people need to get in there, pay attention for any other reason than to advocate for the kinds of programs that help them. I mean, hello. That's how it works in democracy. If you sit on the sidelines, you're on the sidelines. You're not in the game. Yeah. Be an opinion leader. This is what I'm hoping you will do. I mean, honestly, be an opinion leader. And don't just go, oh, I want to vote for this person for dictator. Oh, give me a break. No. Support candidates you want. If you don't like some of the candidates, recruit other candidates. You don't like the ones that are recruited, you get in there and run. I mean, what do you want? It's a democracy. Get involved. Pay attention. Be informed. Express yourself. Okay? You ready to move on? Campaigning. Let's get to it. All right. There's different kinds of campaigning. This campaigning thing here, we got retail and wholesale. All right. You want to try and win an election. Okay. We're going to try and win an election. And so depending on the size of the electorate, you know, like whether you're talking about a small town or you're talking about like a big state or a city or the entire country, the smaller the better. And you actually, with smaller campaigns, you do have an opportunity to have more face-to-face interaction, and you can keep your costs down. Like, for example, canvassing door to door. Now, this is an interesting thing because Barack Obama did not become president of the United States by going door to door and talking to all the American voters. There's a cameraman here watching him as he's having an interaction with them. And of course, you have to be careful because sometimes if you get into a big debate discussion with some random person, You know, that makes nightly news and so forth. But anyway, it's a really, really good way of connecting with people. When my brother first ran for the legislature way back when, he went out and he like knocked on almost all the doors of all the homes and apartments and so forth in the district. It took him a long time. He went through like 2 pairs of shoes to do that. But the advantage was he had a lot of face-to-face interaction, good positive vibes, that people get a sense of who you are. They see that you care, they see that you're informed and so forth. And he won a surprise election against a guy that had been in there for a long, long time. So door-to-door canvassing, it works if you're a good candidate and you can connect with people, and the size of the area you're trying to get votes from is relatively small, right? I think he was running in like Southeast Boise at the time, okay? Other kinds of things as this part of this like face-to-face kind of thing, get some people who are supporters of yours who will invite you and their neighborhood friends and so forth over for a house party. So it's like very, very friendly and chat and food, and then you give a talk and then, you know, answer questions and build support. And they're like, oh yeah, I want a yard sign and I want to contribute to your campaign and whatever. So you start building up support. So that's another good retail politics method, okay? Some of the things that you can do, you know, depends on how much money you have. When I was running, we're able to raise enough money to do lit drops. You print a bunch of literature, you distribute it around all the different neighborhoods. You need a lot of volunteers for that. A lot of campaigns now are going to direct mail. It's a little bit more dependable in the sense of you still need to have the money, you need to print the materials, and then rely on the United States Postal Service to deliver that. Some people use Robo Calls, especially if you can get like some, you know, famous person to have their voice recorded, and then you get all these phone calls. I don't know, I blocked mine. But you get all these phone calls and saying, you know, do this and vote for this and da-da-da-da, and it can work pretty well. Emails and text messaging, these are all parts of the campaign method to try and get the message out to the voters, okay? Paid media, of course you need, by definition, you need money in order to do this. People watch television, TV ads. What was it, Bloomberg who ran for president? Oh my gosh, he spent so much money on paid television ads in all these different states. Well, it didn't work ultimately, but you know, it can. You know, it's better to have it than not. Newspaper advertisements, radio advertisements, internet is another area where there's a lot of stuff coming through here. And of course, you got to frame your message in those ads, but it does cost a fair amount of money. There's another thing called earned media, okay? So this is a little bit more risky, but if you don't have much money, you're like, okay, let's go with this. We want to do events, and we want to try and get the media, you know, television and newspapers to cover our event. So you have a rally in front of the State House, and you give a speech, and you do other kinds of things, and you hope that the coverage of it is going to be positive in the way you do things. Because otherwise, you know, different things could happen. I mean, your opponents might show up, they probably will, or have people show up and try and, like, you know, throw you off and so forth. Yeah, television interviews. I've got a thing later on. You can see Donald Trump did a very good job of doing a lot of earned media, a lot of television interviews. Didn't have to pay anything for them. As he would say, hey, it helped build up their ratings, and television news is about getting decent ratings and so forth. So another thing that happens sometimes is getting into debates. And I've got a link here, and I'll encourage you to click on this link. This is fascinating. In 2014, there was a Republican primary. 4 gentlemen were running for the Republican nomination to become governor, right? And then there was a Democrat running in the November election. Butch Otter was the incumbent. Russ Fulcher was challenging him. He was in the legislature. And then you got Walt Bays and Harley Brown. And their level of support, these 2 gentlemen over here on the left, was not real high. And Butch Otter was like, I will agree to a debate, but he didn't want to go necessarily one-on-one because Russ Fulcher would have an opportunity to go ding, 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 ding. And so Butch Otter was like, okay, anybody who's on the ballot, let's have a debate. And it created an interesting thing. It worked for Otter because half of the debate was not, you know, Russ Fulcher going after him. Half of the debate was hearing the opinions of 2 lesser known candidates, and they had some very interesting things to say. And I've played this for my students in the past, and sometimes it's like, anyway, it got a lot of national attention on Idaho because they're like, what the heck? These two guys, Harley Brown and Walt Bates, did not get that many votes, but they did get into the debate because Machado was not going to agree to the Republican debate unless all the candidates were invited, all the Republican candidates. So they did. It became less risky for him agreeing to those terms. Think of this. If you're the incumbent, if you're running, are you going to agree to 10 or 20 or 30 debates with your opponent? No. One, so you don't look like a chicken, but I mean, you're not going to give your opponent necessarily a lot of opportunities to come after you. Bang, 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 bang. Okay? So check that out. This happened actually. Jimmy McMillan running for New York governor. Cuomo, who's the governor now, he was running as well. And they allowed, this literally is, the rent is too damn high. It literally is the name of a political party, and they were on the ballot, and he got some interesting attention. I don't think he got, he didn't win the election. But anyway, you can click on that one as well. Interesting things happen in debates. Okay, all right. Let's see, where are we? Oh, yes, internet, web pages, right? You want to have web pages. You want to have a presence on the internet. You want to have a presence on YouTube, social media, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat. I don't know. Is there something for Trump and Biden on TikTok? I don't know. I mean, it's like all these different things have been coming in as a way to communicate and connect with voters, right? And they become quite sophisticated, very, very sophisticated. In fact, there's folks that are like, I want to get my message to these particular people, and da 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 da. And you have to be very careful, because if you're prone to like just taking everything at face value, some folks don't necessarily give you all of the truth in it. So you really have to check that yourself, because you don't want to be swayed by false information when you're making a decision on how to vote. Don't let that happen. Okay. You still got some old campaign techniques, old school techniques, billboards. Yeah, that was actually from a television series. Yeah, Parks and Recreation. Leslie Nope, we can anyway. And yard signs, bumper stickers, buttons, lapels, things that create this visual of support and remind people. It's like advertising. So not a bad thing to do. When you make your advertisements, you have an option of going kind of a variety of different directions. If you're in the lead and you just kind of want to hold the lead and so forth, you don't want to risk by looking like a jerk and attacking your opponent. In fact, you might even mention the name of your opponent. You do like a warm and fuzzy and something nice. And so you remind voters that you're good and you've been working hard for them and so forth and so on. Okay. If you're behind, the tendency is to be a little bit more risk-taking. I mean, a negative attack, comparison attack. Although, you know, depending on when this ad comes out or these kinds of things come up, people will have an opportunity to look and go, that is false. I'm checking that, and that's false. I mean, that's just mean and nasty, and it could backfire. Be careful, people. If you hear something within the final 2 or 3 days of a campaign and it seems like too good to be true and so mean and nasty, probably is. Mean and nasty and not true, right? It's trying to persuade you. So be very careful. Take the time, do the research, find out what's going on the issues and the candidates, and cast informed votes. Because watch out, there is negativity out there that is trying to sway you this way and that way, and it is nasty. But you can see why they do it, to try and pull in voters to a candidate or away from another candidate. Okay. In order to do all these things, you need money. Oh my gosh, money is so important in politics. It pays for the advertising, it pays for the polling, it pays for the campaign workers. If you don't have much money, it's like, what can you do? I mean, if you have a lot of money, then you don't need to worry about it. If you're like Bloomberg and you can just pay for everything out of your own back pocket, fine. Even Trump had a lot of money and so forth, although he was able to parlay free appearances on television, so he didn't have to pay as much out of his own pocket. But you need to raise money. Campaigning is expensive. Television is expensive. Your campaign teams and your pollsters and all the people who are doing all the various different things for you, it costs money, right? This is up to 2016. There's your congressional costs, you know, in excess of, what is that, $4 billion, and the presidential costs, those are not cheap either. A lot of money being spent for those, although 2020 is going to be kind of weird because it's a different election, coronavirus election. You're not having all these rallies and things. It's going to be really weird to see how this plays out. Keep an eye on that. I'll be interested in your thoughts on how it's going to play out here. So what about? What are the rules as far as like raising money? Well, once upon a time, people were just like, here, have some money, here, use this and that and so forth. And in the 1970s, we started like looking and going, no, I think we actually need to know where the money is coming from so that we can get a sense of where these candidates, what their thinking is. They're called sunshine reports. Do you see that in your handout? Let the sun shine in on where the money is coming from and so forth. What's really going on in the campaign? They're actually officially called, as it says right there, campaign finance disclosure reports. You have to disclose where the money is coming from. You disclose where the money is being spent, okay, for the official candidate and their campaign and anybody else that's doing that. Now, if you're running for governor or legislature or any of these kind of state or local offices, you have to file reports with the Idaho Secretary of State's office, okay? If you're running for a federal office like U.S. Senator, U.S. House of Representatives, U.S. President, you file with the Federal Election Commission. Okay, you got to file your reports, your sunshine reports. Okay, yeah, and the person officially in charge is the treasurer, and you can look on campaign posters to find out who the treasurer is. If you were in my class right now, I would point you to like, oh, my brother's campaign when he was running for Congress, he had to file reports with the FEC. His treasurer, he had to sign those. When now he's running for local office, Ada County Commissioner, or Highway District campaign treasurer, I got to sign those too. Okay, so we want to know where the money's coming from. Okay, an interesting thing. There's limits on how much money can come in. This is a federal limit sheet right here. So, for example, an individual donor can contribute to a candidate running $2,800 in the primary election, $2,800 in the general election. Well, yeah, that's a lot of money for me. I mean, hello. But if you really, really, really wanted to help that candidate get elected, I suppose you could contribute to a political action committee, a PAC, political action committee. You can contribute $5,000 and then they could spend money supporting them, although that's still not very much. You can contribute to the party. Oh, look, you can contribute $10,000 to a state district local party. Over $35,000. Wow. Or if you just got a lot of money, can you just spend it on your own and send a message out to the voters that this person's really good and maybe this person's not so good? I mean, can you do that if you have that money? What do you think? Money in politics cannot really, really ultimately be limited. I mean, you can limit it here. You can't give more officially to a campaign, but you can say, hey, I've given you a check for this candidate that I really like, but I'm going to do what I can to help you out, right? Says who? Says the United States Constitution, First Amendment. This has been checked. Buckley versus Valeo. I got 2 Supreme Court cases for you right here. Buckley versus Valeo, 1976. The gist, right? Free speech, political speech. You can't limit it. So if you want to say something, you want to spend a bunch of money putting television advertisements and all kinds of things on and so forth, you can do it. Supreme Court said government can't limit that. So cut a few relatively small checks to the candidate, but then spend a bunch of your money on your own. Organize it that way. That also came up in the case Citizens United versus the FEC. That was one that President Obama didn't like. You can check this link here. Here he is giving the speech, State of the Union address. And while some of the members of the Supreme Court there, including Samuel Alito, hear him criticizing the result of that speech and the decision that allows for First Amendment spending on politics, Alito's like, he doesn't go to hear, presidents, talk about that. Who determines what the First Amendment says and how money can be spent? Supreme Court, First Amendment, Supreme Court's constitutional issue. So, yeah, look at this. You're rich, start your own super political action committee, and then you spend it on whatever you want, okay? 94% of all individual donors to super PACs came from just over 1,000 people. So very, very wealthy people can have a big, big influence in politics because there's really no limit on how much they can contribute out of their own and spend on their own, right? The key thing is, this is kind of weird, just make sure your ads that you're doing don't say vote for so-and-so. Don't say the magic words. So if you got some wealthy person that wants to support Donald Trump, they could put millions of dollars worth of advertisements on saying, isn't Trump doing a great job? Is that legal? Yes. What if they said vote for Trump? No, 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 that would have run afoul of federal laws. So it's just make sure you don't put vote for Pedro. You know, say Pedro was great. Well, don't you think Pedro should stick around? You know, like, these are the rules, okay? As interpreted by the Constitution, by the Supreme Court. Okay, it's very, very important. So if you're running for a campaign and you're trying to get some support, a lot of the candidates running, unless they're independently wealthy, we'll just go around and mention, again, Michael Bloomberg running for the Democratic nomination. Ultimately, I mean, he spent a lot of his own money and didn't get the nomination. But some of the other candidates go, if you're running as a Republican, go to main big money people from the right. So we'll go with those ones first, right near the bottom here of your page. The Cook brothers, right? They're definitely involved. What did I have them involved in business, and they have been big supporters of key Republican candidates in the past. They've got all kinds of investments in various different things. They're the Marriott. So do you know what the Marriott's involved in? Yeah, hotels. And they tend to also be fairly conservative and be big contributors to Republicans. So if you're a Republican and you want to get ahead and so forth, these are some of the people you talk to. Maybe not so much us. I mean, we're voters. But these guys can help with their financial support. You know, yeah, they'll contribute to the party and to the candidate and so forth, but more importantly, their political action committees and their own, you know, pocketbook can spend and say all kinds of various different things positive about you, perhaps they want to, negative about, you know, your opponents, depending on what the tactics are. Sheldon Adelson, another, he's very involved in Las Vegas businesses and so forth. And so he does like it when when candidates he support also favor expansion of gaming opportunities and gambling, you know, internet gambling and so forth. In Idaho, Frank Vandersloot, who owns Melaleuca, he's been very involved in politics, big supporter of Republican candidates, although he supports some Democrats occasionally if he sees them as being people that he wants in office. So these are big conservative contributors. On the other side, on the left, George Soros, right? So these are who Democrats might look to try and like win over onto their side and get them supporting. Because if you got how many Democrats were running for president? Like for a while, there was like 30. I mean, those folks will need some money to get going. So if you get some key support from some key people, you could stay in the game longer, right? Warren Buffett, oh my gosh. I mean, he's very involved. Look at it, Buffett stuff, Berkshire portfolio companies and so forth. He's got investments in all kinds of things. I heard he just dumped a bunch of airline stock though, because he's like concerned the airlines aren't doing well, whatever. Anyway, so Buffett tends to support a little bit more on the Democratic side. But he's, you know, it's like these guys are looking at, what can the government do to me? I mean, politicians get elected to the government. What could they raise or lower my taxes? And oh yeah, maybe we should put some money into politics. Jeffrey Katzenberg, Hollywood, DreamWorks, swamp. I'm going to clear the swamp. Anyway, yeah, they tend to support Democrats as well. This one I thought was very interesting. Peter Lewis is deceased, but he came up with an insurance company. Can you figure out? Because if you look at the name of the insurance company, it actually is not a surprise that it tends to support more left-leaning politicians, Democratic politicians, and so forth. Are you ready? Did you guess it? Progressive. Insurance for liberals, yeah. Anyway, so yeah, there's Flo. So he was a big contributor to Democratic causes and so forth as well. All right, so let's flip over. We're going to wrap this up here. Wholesale politics, all right? So you know, retail, door to door to door to door to door to door. When you get wholesale, as far as like, you know, business, you're like bigger, okay? You're going to need more money. You're going to need, especially if you're running against somebody who's an incumbent. Did we mention that? Incumbent, the guy who's already in office, everyone knows. And if they haven't really messed up, the people are like, I don't know, things are going okay. You're the incumbent. Does Donald Trump have an advantage this year as an incumbent? Everyone knows him. Although for a presidential race, everyone knows the incumbent as well as the challenger. And if things are going very well, you tend to do well. You tend to get reelected. For the House of Representatives, United States House of Representatives, incumbents win almost all the time. Okay, some of the close races, Republicans and Democrats, they can get a swing this way and that way. But I would say probably 350 to 400 members of the House of Representatives are probably going to get reelected, even in a, you know, a swing year. So there's a lot of advantages, a lot of precedential, a lot of money already coming to them because some of the big contributors are like, well, you know, I think this guy's going to win. Why is he going to win? Because he's an incumbent, and he's also getting a lot of money from a lot of folks. How much money does it take to run a campaign trying to defeat an incumbent? A lot. And so some of those campaigns don't even start. So money does make a big difference. Incumbency does make a big difference. Because if you're going to run like a big statewide campaign or a congressional campaign, you need a lot of staff, tons of volunteers, lots of money to get in there. Paid polling, public opinion polling. And you're going to have to, yeah. Actually, this would be more a little retail, you know, where he's handing out the things and so forth. You need more staff. You need more public opinion polling, all right? You're going to need to target various different groups. This will be interesting. Think about this. You need to win with a majority. Most elections is you need to get a majority, 50% or more. Sometimes you just need to come in first place among candidates, but a lot of the races you need to come in first place. So or over 50%. So you need to come up with a strategy. I want to win these people. I want to win these people. I'm going to target these people. I'm not going to get these people, so forget about that. But if I get enough of these ones, different groups, boom, this is going to make a big, big difference. I want you to think about that ahead. What is it going to take for, say, Biden or Trump to win as president in 2020? You got to target various different demographic groups. You got to target what are the issues and things that are going to appeal to them, okay, as opposed to the other candidate. Obviously, one thing you can count on for wholesale politics is you are going to get more news media coverage. A lot of times for local races and so forth, I mean, they don't even cover it. You're like, hey, pay attention to me. No, but if you get a governor's race or a U.S. senator's race, you're probably going to get more news media coverage. You just need to make sure that you polish your message so that it comes across well and it doesn't look like a complete, you know, give a good speech, you know, tantalize it, but don't fall off the stage, because otherwise, guess what's going to lead the news that night? You falling off the stage, okay? Because that's interesting, you know, like a train wreck. When you get into the big, big time, right, running for president of the United States, this has been actually pretty cool this year because we did have an opportunity to look at these kinds of things. And as you go into November, you're going to continue having an opportunity to look at how the presidential races played out, right? There used to be a thing called public financing for presidential campaigns. It was very interesting. The last time it actually happened, I want to say 2008, the Republican candidate, John McCain, was like, sure, you know, there was a little check off and a certain amount of money is set aside and the major party candidates can get that money, but then they have to limit how much they spend. So McCain did that. I think he was limited to like $80 million or something for a nationwide fall campaign, general election campaign. But his opponent, Barack Obama, was looking and going, yeah, actually, I don't think I'll take that $80 million. I don't want to be limited in how much I can raise. And he ended up raising well in excess of $80 million. So therefore, he could spend well in excess of $80 million. So guess how many major Republican Democrat candidates have done the public financing route since then? Zero. Okay, I mean, they're hard to even talk about that. So anyway, I don't know why we still got the slide up there. It was an idea. Obviously, you're going to have lots of coverage, constant coverage. I mean, right now, if you were like tuning in, is besides the coronavirus thing, is there attention on the presidential race? Yeah, I mean, the president, Joe Biden, you know, Trump and Biden are in the news. I mean, sometimes positive, sometimes negative. They're in the news. There's a lot of attention. Is it better? I don't know. This is where you guys really, man, I don't know. People ask me, you know, how do you find out what's really going on? Oh, yeah, just look at one side of the issue. Now, a lot of people tend to sort of gravitate to the news sources that they feel most comfortable. And it ends up being a little bit of an echo chamber and like preaching to the choir and so forth. So for example, you look on here, MSNBC, CNN, Fox News, I mean, they're all major news networks and so forth. But do you get a little bit of a different message from these ones, you know, as you go across? Which one, this is not too hard, which one tends to be a little bit more, you know, conservative, a little bit more favorable to Trump, and depending on what time you tune in? Fox, yeah, I mean, some of the later evening hosts tend to be much, much more favorable. Similarly, MSNBC, CNN, much more critical of President Trump, supportive of Democrats, although, I mean, it's not 100% one way or another. How do you overcome that bias that exists in the news media? Get lots Be critical, listen carefully. If you hear something that sounds like out of, look it up, research it. It could very well be there's some slant going on there and so forth. You got to do this, folks. I mean, it's your country. It's democracy. The news media is very important in getting information to you. But be very critical. Otherwise, you're going to be played, and you don't want to get played. Okay. Also, as far as like, you know, efforts, lots of earned media and television. It's a little bit trickier today, although I don't know, you could, you know, do the visuals and so forth. You know, Trump and Biden can go on various different talk shows and so forth. Trump really showed how, I mean, somebody did an estimate of the value of how, of the time that he was on all kinds of news networks, whether it was Fox or MSNBC or CNN when he was running for president, even still, or on like, you know, the Tonight Show. It's very, very, very valuable. You have to be very well presented and so forth, because there are risks. If you get on television and say something stupid, I mean, it could backfire. So, you know, you need to do that. But that opportunity does come in a national race for president of the United States. Clearly, getting back to this and focus on this issue. This is very interesting. Targeting different demographic groups. This is interesting. Take a look at this. White men and women more divided over Trump and Clinton. This was back in the 2016. This is a poll that was done. So we've got Trump support from among white men, much, much larger than among white women. You see a big gap there. I mentioned that to you earlier and so forth. What is going on there? If you compare that to the 2012 race, Romney, support for Romney among white men versus white women, I mean, there was a 6% gap there, much, much bigger gap going on there. What's the issue? Is it like, are there personal things at stake? Is there anything that happens that is happening now in the presidential race that could sway that? I don't know. We'll talk more about when we get to the presidential race, because that'll be on our last thing, but our last lesson. You know, what is it going to take for Trump to win or Biden to win? But it was a fascinating thing here. Trump's support among men, white men, was much larger than Romney's support. That was the Republican candidate for president in 2012. But Trump lost support among white women compared to what Romney had. So some interesting things going on here. What about the Latino vote? This was an interesting one because there was a sense that, you know, if you wanted to win, like for example, here are Democrat candidates: Gore, who lost to Bush; Kerry, who lost to Bush in 2000 and 2004. Bush made headway. He didn't get, you know, majority of Latino vote in this country, but the Democrats got a little bit smaller percentage of that. Did the Latino vote turn out big for Trump, or did, you know, was that down here, or did the Latino vote big for Clinton? I think they voted very big for Clinton, although in certain areas, particularly the Midwest, Trump managed to do very well there. This was interesting. The swing states, Florida, North Carolina, Wisconsin, Ohio, Michigan. In the last 100 days, and Trump loves doing rallies. I think he's frustrated right now not being able to do rallies because of the coronavirus. And that, you know, that's one of his things that he really, really likes to do. And when he was campaigning in 2016, lots of rallies in Florida. Swing state, big state, he won it. He won North Carolina too. Not as many in Wisconsin, although Hillary Clinton didn't do any and Trump won. So, you know, when Hillary Clinton's like, oh, why did I lose? One of the reasons, perhaps, you needed to spend more time. And in these states all here, Trump visited in larger numbers. So, you know, Trump's not going to come to Idaho to campaign. If things ease up and so forth, and you can have rallies, I don't know, there's going to be in the fall, or there's going to be television advertisements, and there's going to be a lot of money spent on TV ads in Florida, both sides, North Carolina, Wisconsin, Ohio, Michigan, Pennsylvania. Yeah, counting it. Those are key swing states. That's part of the electoral strategy for these candidates. And they need to be smart. Okay. Yep, there you go. So that was the electoral vote in 2016. And there's Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Florida, and so forth, Iowa. Okay. And those are going to be states that are going to make a big difference as well this time. Again, if Idaho goes with Biden, you know who won? A Democrat won the last time in Idaho? It was 1964. It was Lyndon Johnson. That was the last Democrat to win in Idaho. Okay, so if Trump loses in Idaho, I mean the whole country could be blue. So, oh, whoa. Speaking of red, 1972. Let's get to the definition here. We got a few definitions and then we'll wrap up. Landslide. It's a political definition. It means a really, really, really big win. 1972. This was Richard Nixon running for re-election. He probably should have, like, you know, not being worried about, and people shouldn't have broken into the Watergate hotel to go into the Democratic National Committee to get all this stuff on him, because that did not work out well for Nixon. I mean, he won. I mean, look at this. He won. Only Massachusetts and Washington, D.C. ended up going for the Democrat candidate, Senator George McGovern. And even here, look at the popular vote, right? I mean, 60%, you know, compared to 37% and so forth, translated to a massive, massive win for Nixon, okay? So when you get a big landslide, like, is there gonna be a landslide this year, one way or the other? I don't think so. We've had some pretty close elections. I don't know though. There's a lot that could happen between May and November. But if you win real big, you have a mandate. A mandate. It's like the people are saying, you get to do this, right? So you'll say, as president, I had a huge win, and make sure that this is a part of it too. You weren't all like wishy-washy and so forth on what you were running for. You had a clear statement. This is what I want to do if I get elected, and you get a huge victory. Then you go to Washington, D.C., and you take the oath of office and you tell Congress that they need to do something too. Of course, they're a separate group of people. I mean, can you imagine? What if it's a close race, like Trump versus Clinton? That was a fairly close race. Yeah, I mean, Clinton actually got the popular vote. And the Democrats are in control of the House, and the Republicans and Democrats are very, very close in the Senate. Will Trump be able to say, I have a mandate to do this, that, and so forth? Probably not. It's pretty hard to get a mandate to get everyone to come through on your stated public policy plans. We've thrown a lot of political stuff at you today, and make sure you've taken good notes and you have a good understanding of that. We'll go on to the next stuff, interest groups, next time. Yeah, so be safe, stay healthy, and I'll see you guys later.